All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're putting on our strategist hats, adopting what's known as the commander's estimate, to really break down the latest geopolitical chess match happening between the United States and Iran. Right now, the entire world's attention is locked onto the Strait of Hormuz. It is, without a doubt, one of the most vital strategic choke points on the planet. And you might be wondering why you should care about a stretch of water thousands of miles away. Well, roughly a fifth of the world's total oil consumption flows right through there. That means the maneuvers we're seeing today directly impact global trade, energy markets, and yes, the prices you pay at your local gas pump. We have a rapidly developing situation on our hands regarding a brand new proposal out of Tehran. Now, to be clear, we aren't here to take political sides. We're just going to look strictly at the intelligence, the maneuvering, and the structural pressures driving both players. Let's explain the strategy.
Okay, so let's dive right into the massive strategic dilemma literally sitting on the president's desk right now. The big question we're unpacking today is this. What is the true intention behind Iran's latest diplomatic push? When a nation that's under heavy, crushing economic and military pressure suddenly comes out and offers a conditional negotiation, we really have to pause and ask what the ultimate goal is. I mean, are we looking at a genuine off-ramp to end the current naval blockade, or is this just a highly calculated delay tactic, something designed to buy them time while fracturing the focus of the U.S.?
To figure that out, here's our commander's estimate for today. First, we'll look at the new Iranian proposal. Second, evaluating White House talks. Third, decoupling the maritime crisis. Fourth, sanctions and regime stability. And finally, number 5, fractures within the IRGC.
All right, Section 1, the new Iranian proposal and assessing adversary intent. So Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi hasn't exactly just been sitting around in Tehran waiting for the phone to ring. No, he's been on an absolute diplomatic blitz. He's executing this rapid shuttle diplomacy, moving incredibly fast from Islamabad to consult with regional partners, then flying over to Oman, who frequently acts as a back-channel mediator for them, and then all the way up to Moscow to sit down with Vladimir Putin. This isn't random. This rapid movement is explicitly designed to project a united, multinational front before their formal terms even hit the negotiating table.
And while he's out there building this coalition, Iran is aggressively trying to control the narrative. They're framing the currently stalled negotiations as a product of Washington's inconsistency. It's a setup for their new, conditional offer. By getting out there and publicly stating that the obstacles to peace are Washington's destructive habits, their unreasonable demands, and their shifting positions, Tehran is basically trying to put the U.S. on the defensive right out of the gate. They're telling the world, hey, we want to negotiate, but you guys are making it impossible. It's a classic preemptive PR tactic.
Okay, so here is the absolute crux of it. Iran's proposal is basically this. Let's address the immediate, painful stuff right now, meaning the naval blockade, and we'll table the whole nuclear issue for later. That is the core of their offer. They essentially want to separate the immediate pain they're experiencing in the Strait of Hormuz from the broader, much messier nuclear file. They want sovereignty and safe transit back now, and they want to kick the can down the road on their nuclear program.
Which brings us to Section 2, evaluating White House talks and assessing friendly forces and readiness.
Now look at this. This is fascinating. If you look at the readout from recent national security team meetings at the White House, there's a stark contrast. Sitting at the table, you've got the CIA director, the Secretary of State, and the Vice President. But conspicuously missing from that room, the Secretary of Defense, CENTCOM commanders, and the Joint Staff. When you have a massive maritime crisis involving a naval blockade at a major global choke point, the absence of top military brass is a huge tactical tell. To really get why this matters, we can look at what retired General Mark Kimmitt pointed out. He noted that missing military leadership strongly suggests a pivot away from hardball military options and toward a diplomatic review. Think about it. When the Defense Department isn't even in the room during a crisis like this, it heavily implies that the response being cooked up is a diplomatic one, not a kinetic military strike. It tells us the U.S. is taking Iran's proposal seriously as a diplomatic avenue rather than gearing up for an escalation.
Because, the military advisors were actually driving this conversation, their advice would almost certainly be to keep the pressure on and leave all military options firmly on the table. As General Kimmitt suggested, a defense-led approach would probably be a hardball refusal to let Iran dictate the terms of the deal. From a strictly military perspective, you absolutely do not give up your best leverage, which is the blockade, without locking down your core objectives first, and that absolutely includes the nuclear file. This perfectly sets up a pretty dangerous strategic concept.
Let's move to Section 3, decoupling the maritime crisis and the tactical shift in the Strait.
So what Iran is attempting here is a classic tactical separation. We call this decoupling.
They are trying to decouple the immediate maritime crisis from the long-term nuclear negotiations. By doing this, Iran is crossing their fingers that the U.S. will lift the devastating naval blockade that is currently strangling their economy, while still getting to keep their nuclear program securely in their back pocket as future leverage. It's kind of like trying to negotiate your way out of a speeding ticket, all while keeping the stolen goods hidden in your trunk.
And frankly, it's pretty brilliant how they've managed to shift the baseline here. Just by getting the U.S. to even sit down and discuss this role, Iran has totally moved the goalposts. Think about it. Just back on February 27th, the baseline assumption globally was simply that the Strait of Hormuz was strictly an international waterway. Guaranteed free passage, end of story. But now, because of Iran's maneuvering and the crisis they've sparked, the conversation has changed. The U.S. is essentially being forced to negotiate the actual nature of Iran's role in administering that very same strait.
Former Ambassador Henry Enshower hit the nail on the head here. He points out that this is a classic Iranian negotiating style: delay, overreach, and shift the focus. And it actually represents a massive strategic victory for Tehran. Before a single signature is even on a piece of paper, Iran has forced the international community to acknowledge their influence over this critical waterway. That is the huge risk of this current proposal. Engaging with it inadvertently legitimizes Iran's claim to authority over an international transit route. It basically rewards their initial aggression.
All right, Section 4, Sanctions and Regime Stability. Let's identify the real center of gravity.
You see, the U.S. blockade is applying this immense asymmetric pressure. And for the regime in Tehran, this level of economic strangulation is bordering on an existential threat. The naval blockade is completely choking off their economy. While to us it might just look like numbers on a spreadsheet or a news headline, for the Iranian leadership, this severe economic damage threatens their actual survival. They're absolutely desperate to lift that blockade as fast as possible, which totally explains that rushed, chaotic shuttle diplomacy we talked about earlier.
Because if history tells us anything, it's that dictatorial regimes can withstand a whole lot of angry citizens. But their Achilles heel? It's always the payroll. It all comes down to funding the security apparatus. The Iranian regime has proven time and again that they are more than willing to unleash security forces against their own citizens to maintain order. So the ultimate pressure point isn't just civilian unrest on its own. It's the exact moment the government can no longer afford to pay the guys whose job it is to suppress that unrest.
I mean, look at Cuba since 1961, or Venezuela today. How do they survive massive economic turmoil? Simple. As long as the internal security forces, in Iran's case, the IRGC and the Baji, are getting paid and are willing to crack heads, the regime stays afloat. But the second the money runs out, the whole house of cards comes down. The U.S. blockade is targeting this exact vulnerability. If international sanctions dry up the funds for the IRGC, the regime's protective shield cracks.
And that leads us perfectly into our final section, number 5, fractures within the IRGC and exploiting internal vulnerabilities.
Because the reality is, the IRGC is absolutely not a monolith. Beneath the surface, we are witnessing an intense, intrafactional battle for power. History in the Middle East shows us that joint leadership councils rarely ever hold together. Eventually, someone always tries to be the top dog. Right now, there's a massive internal struggle playing out between different factions inside the IRGC itself. Each group is aggressively elbowing the others, trying to prove that they are the true, uncompromising executors of the supreme leader's will.
This internal friction is a massive vulnerability. In fact, it might be the very thing driving Tehran to seek a maritime deal right now, just so they can stabilize their own command structure. Think about it. When you're fighting a chaotic battle for dominance inside your own house, fighting a massive external conflict at the same time is just a recipe for total collapse. They aren't just trying to beat the U.S. blockade, they are trying to buy enough breathing room to survive each other. The leadership might be pushing for this decoupled Strait of Hormuz deal just to secure a quick win, get the cash flowing again, and then immediately turn inward to settle their own domestic turf wars before the entire regime splinters. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we have to ask the multi-billion-dollar question. By resolving the blockade today, is Washington actually sacrificing long-term regional security? If the U.S. agrees to this proposal, sure, they might secure the Strait of Hormuz right now and ease all those global shipping headaches. But if that allows the Iranian regime to stabilize its failing economy, comfortably pay its security forces, and quietly advance its nuclear program without the world breathing down its neck, are we just setting the stage for a massively dangerous, highly armed crisis a few years down the road? That is the exact strategic calculation sitting on the table in Washington right now. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on the street.